This story is true. It is a story that occurred in the early 1990s when I was working in a trauma clinic at a VA in Brockton, Massachusetts. The great guy who I was working with, Mike Dodd, who is a psychologist, he and I were talking about how do we help the veterans who really need it the most. We're kind of cherry picking here at the VA. We're only the ones who aren't turned off by the VA are visiting us. But what about the guys who are really broken, who don't trust the VA and are homeless? How do we reach them? So Mike said, well, did you hear about this place in Boston that just opened called the New England Shelter for Homeless Veterans? I said, no, I didn't. He says, well, they took over this abandoned 7-story bank building in the middle of downtown Boston. And veterans from all over the country are going there who are homeless, and they're figuring it out as they go. They don't have a VA there, no services. They're providing care for each other, and they're just making a go of it. We should just go there and see if they'll let us come in. So we both knew that the reputation of the VA would probably prevent us from being allowed in, but we thought, well, let's give it a shot. So the next Monday, we drove our cars into Boston and met up at the New England Shelter for Homeless Veterans, went inside and went to the front desk and said, hi, we're from the VA, and I'm a psychiatrist, and Mike here is a psychologist. We'd like to see what we could do to help out. And the guy behind the desk said, VA, get the F out of here. And so we were thrown out. The next week we came back, same thing. Hi, we're from the VA. We want to see if we can help out. We work in a trauma clinic. Get the F out of here. There's a different guy that time. And every week we just kept going back and getting thrown out by the same people or new people. And so we were kind of getting to be known as the people who kept getting thrown out. So one day, I don't know how many weeks it was into this, we went in and completely expecting to be thrown out. And we said to the guy, okay, we're here again. What do you think? And he said, all right, well, just wait a second. I want you to go see George. And we thought, okay, who's George? But this is different, though, so we'll just wait here. So he gets on the phone and he makes this phone call, and he's very kind of secretive about it. And then he gets off the phone, comes to us and says, okay, George will see you. So go up those stairs to the second floor and go to the bunker. George will be waiting for you in there. We thought, the bunker, what's the bunker? Who's George? So, okay, but we're in. So we went to the stairs, went up to the second floor, mostly dark, mostly with no lights on. Bunks, guys are sleeping. And there's this big walled-in room, and the door's shut. We asked these guys, where's the bunker? And they said, that's the bunker in there, that room right there. Like, okay, so we knock on the door. And the door opens up, and it could have been Errol Flynn on the other side, a little bit a portly Errol Flynn, this very debonair Latin American gentleman with his hair slicked back, a big cigarette holder with a cigarette with ashes dangling off the end, in this suit coat with an ascot, a beautiful shirt and cufflinks. We thought, wait a minute, this is the bunker? And he says, are you the guys from the VA? And we say, yes. He says, well, I'm George. Come on in. George was a journalist from Argentina who, during the troubles in Argentina in the 1980s, where a dictator took over the country, he wrote very courageously about the violations of human rights. So he was imprisoned and tortured, and through a very dramatic story, left the country, wound up in the United States, and of all things, wound up being kind of the patron of the bunker, where the guys who were considered to be the ones who had the greatest degree of trauma hung out. And some of them never came out of that bunker because it was just too much to engage the rest of the world. And George cared for them. So Mike and I walk in, and George says, okay, who goes first? And I said, well, I'll go first. He says, okay, go in there and we'll start sending people to you. Well, in there was a big closet with a table in it and 2 chairs. And when you closed the door, the couches and chairs of the bunker were right there. So people were just sitting right there. So I go, okay, well, I go into this closet, and the first guy comes in, sits down. We're at this tiny little table with our knees pretty much touching, and get to work. So, okay, first day, I don't know how many people we saw. Mike went down the hall. He found another space. And every Monday, we just kept showing up. Gotten to know George better, going out to lunch with George, hearing his stories, seeing these guys. After a while, we get to know every single one of them. They know us. Hey, Doc, good to see you. Thanks for coming in. And after a while, it's just a routine. And one of the things I noticed as this was going on is that there was a very tall man. I'm going to call him Smitty. It wasn't his name, but for confidentiality, we'll call him Smitty. Standing there every time I came out of this little office, and he would be looking at me with these eyes like charcoal, unblinking, unaffected gaze, looking right through me. He wasn't angry, he wasn't sad, he was just looking at me with these laser eyes, dark eyes, sizing me up. See him come by. And after weeks of this, the one time I come out at the end of the day and Smitty says, "Hey, Doc, I want to talk to you." I said, "Okay, all right. So next week, you come in first." So that began a tale, which is why we called this the Athena Project. And here we go. Smitty had been a very accomplished painter before Vietnam. Very accomplished. He was very talented. And when he was drafted, he went to Vietnam. And he was a tank commander, not just of one tank, but of a battalion of tanks. So he had a lot of responsibility and saw an enormous amount of horrific combat, and one harrowing story after another of carnage and close calls and mayhem and on a daily basis. And what I described earlier when I was talking about the themes of Healing the Heart of America, this is really a story of Smitty, where his sense of a noble goal was completely shattered once he went to Vietnam, that there could be anything worth living for, like liberty and the defense of democracy and the innocent, because his experience of the war was just mass killing. So that he could stay alive and the people closest to him. In the frenzy of combat, that's all that mattered, because the sense of terror and horror didn't allow much else to be thought about. So now his sense of who he was very shattered. And as the war ended, he felt completely broken as a human being. The things he had done, the things he had seen, the inhumanity on all sides, the brokenness and horror of it all. He felt that all he really had left was his sense of camaraderie with soldiers. So he stayed in the military after Vietnam, and he wound up becoming the head of cultural affairs for all of Europe for NATO. And so he would organize the trips to the Louvre or to the Uffizi or for generals or dignitaries or combat soldiers or soldiers. And when the first Gulf War came, he was put in the team that was in charge of the logistics to bring materials to Kuwait, tanks and ammunition and food and all the other things. And that very brief war, once it ended in 100 hours or something like that, there was a debriefing in Berlin where Smitty was stationed. And he said a young major from the Pentagon came to debrief the room full of people who had been doing this logistical work. This young major stands up in front of the group and says, "Man, I want to thank you for what you've done, because you made up for that piss poor job we did in Vietnam." Now, to Smitty, the only thing holding him together was the sense of some kind of camaraderie among soldiers, And for this young man, this young major, to say that meant that there was nothing holding him together. So he said when he heard that, he was like a fragile piece of crystal that just shattered. And he stood up right in the middle of the meeting, his meeting's still going on. He walked to the airport at the base that they were in, got on the first plane to the States, landed in Boston, and had been walking the streets of Boston for 2 years until I was talking to him right then. In the meantime, he had been painting. And he told me about his time in Berlin when he used to go and visit the Pergamon Museum. And he said, "Do you know much about the Pergamon?" I said, "No, I don't know anything about the Pergamon." He says, "Well, Pergamon was a city-state in Anatolia, what's now Turkey, but in the Aegean Sea, just opposite and up a little from Athens. Also worshipped Athena, just like Athens did. Athena. Pergamon was dedicated to Athena also. And they also had a series of temples and shrines to Athena. And on the frieze of one of these temples, there is a depiction of the war between the gods and the Titans, these big human creatures that are like bigger than humans that battled the gods for control of the earth. And he told me about how this whole temple had been disassembled from Pergamon in the 1800s and brought to Berlin. And it was reconstructed and a magnificent museum built around it that houses many architectural artifacts. But he said that when he went to this museum in Berlin, he saw one element of statues depicting this war between the gods and the Titans were arranged. And one element of it shows the goddess Athena holding a Titan by his hair. And Athena, she's the goddess of war. And so don't mess with Athena if you're going to go to war. But Athena is also the goddess of culture and civilization. So here she is, Athena with her spear and her shield, holding this big Titan by the hair, and he's completely powerless as she's got him by the hair. And Smitty was just captivated by that scene of that statue, and he found himself painting versions of it where he was the soldier being held by the hair and a Vietnamese woman was Athena, or all different kind of combinations of this. And he said, "I don't know why I paint this. I just keep painting it over and over again. I'm not sure why." And weeks and weeks and months of talking about it, and here's what we came up with, that the Greeks were saying that we are the Titans. There's a time in our life where we think we're in control of everything, that everything that happens to us we can somehow change or we can fix, but then a car accident happens that we have nothing to do with, or a child is killed that we have no control over, or a loved one becomes ill, or we lose that job, things we have no control over. So we are at those times grabbed by the hair by Athena, right? The fates tell us differently, that we do not have this big control. And this big puffed up Titan is us when we think arrogantly that we have control over all elements of our own life, and we don't. So the depiction of this battle between the gods, and in this case Athena and a Titan, was a way of saying, you know what? You're going to struggle in life, and you will be broken by life at times. But the task is to do what happens in the myth. The way the myth plays out, there's this battle between the gods and the Titans. The Titans lose, and the gods hand over control of the earth to humans. So the idea is that we lose our Titan nature and become real humans, and that the great lesson of our powerlessness is humility and compassion. And without humility and compassion, you can't have a democracy. So the reason this was on the frieze at Pergamon was to remind the citizenry that if we're going to try to have a democracy, we need to be humble and compassionate. So Smitty and I talked about how that relates to his situation. Now, years after his experience of Vietnam and a couple years walking the streets of Boston homeless, his family didn't know where he was. His family was completely in the dark about where he was and what happened to him. He was that broken. So the next step was figuring out how to re-enter the world. And this is where we help each other. This is where the arts help us. This is where we walk each other home. So the purpose of the Athena Project is to show us the way home, to show us how we become human as a result of our suffering, how we create community, how we elevate the conversation between us through, as Athena does, takes war and turns it into culture. How do we take the division and anger and finger pointing at the time we're in and transform it into humility and compassion? This is the role of the arts. Welcome to the Athena Project. That's it for today's episode of the Athena Project on the arts and transformation. Get a healthy dose of upliftment every Tuesday with more episodes of the Athena Project, which is brought to you by Healing the Heart of America, where every day we have a different theme to bring unity to the country and upliftment to hearts. I'm your host, Dr. John Woodall, reminding you we need each other.